All right. So we had our three breakout questions on the table. What was the thesis of the text? What stood out to you most about the text, and what new understandings about Harriet Tubman did you gain through reading the text? Who would like to share? So, what did you talk about in your breakout groups as far as the thesis of the reading?
For the thesis, we kind of just like talked about how she is often like overlooked, and she's only like referenced like with the underground railroad, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
And then I could answer number two also. Um, like something that stood out to me the most was like how she like led her own like battalion in the Civil War, and then it kind of like relates back to like number one, how like I only like learned about how she like helped enslaved individuals like escape. Yeah, that's it.
Jay, you had your hand up. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say for number one, I was gonna say the thesis of basically like the reading in general was just showing the underlying like truth of like who Harriet Tubman was and all the accomplishments she really had. Because I feel like within history and just in general that they mainly point out the fact of like the importance of like she was moving slaves from one place to another, and that what's called, and that there's not a lot to her other than that, like layered. Because it said before too in the reading that that they said that she couldn't read or write, but she was still able to read the stars and like, was able to conduct like which way to go and stuff like that. A lot deeper than like what we were taught. So I just
And transporting enslaved people, not slaves, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. So wait, is it? It's not slaves, right? I forgot the term for it.
enslaved,
It's
enslaved.
enslaved. Right, enslaved. Thank you.
Um, uh-huh. Anyone else? What stood out to you regarding the reading?
Something that stood out to me is just pretty much how like the lengths people would go just to like um minimize like black people, important black figures. Like the stupid thing about the like the YouTube video and everything like that. Like why would you even go like it doesn't make sense, you know? And it's just like the idea of like people want to minimize like how strong black people have been and are. And yeah, that's something that stood out to me during the entire reading.
Good call out. Um, what new understand and it was talked about a little bit, but if you want to go in a little bit more detail as to what new understandings did you gain from reading the text? Anyone else want to speak to the new understandings that they gained from reading the text? Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was just gonna say that I think it's crazy. I guess this one goes to like number two for the number two question. I think it's crazy that it said that in like August 2013 that some group of people was trying to make like a sex tape out of like her name for it or something like that. I just thought that was wild to think about, and then that they were like boycotting it to get removed because I think that like already in general it's already crazy to like do that based off the fact of that she's like such an important role in history like itself that they would find like I guess like the audacity to like make something so vulgar out of it. You know what I'm saying? I just thought that was just crazy just to see and hear.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's kind of what Anthony was pointing to as well, like the lengths people will go to try to minimize historical figures. So what I want to do before I get actually into the text itself, I want to provide us with two kind of frameworks to think about as we work through the text. The first of which is this notion of fugitivity, right? Now, naturally, in the term, right, is this idea of being a fugitive. But I want to put this notion of fugitive in the proper context. So if we're thinking about what Harriet Tubman did in the capacity of being able to transport enslaved people off of the plantation into freedom, this is the personification of fugitivity. So what fugitivity is in the plantation society, right? In plantation society, you are considered property. You are the property of whoever runs or owns that plantation. So once you decide to try to liberate yourself or escape from the plantation, you are in fact a fugitive. So it's the idea of stealing yourself away from the plantation. But what we must know about fugitivity is once you escape the plantation, that doesn't mean that you're free, right? They're going to send the hounds after you to make sure that they bring you back to the plantation. So part of fugitivity is doing things like making sure you clear your tracks so you can't get followed. Part of fugitivity is like going in the water so that way you don't have a scent, so the hounds can't smell you, right? So what fugitivity is a constant state of flight. Because once you get off that plantation, again, that does not mean that you're free. You have to take very secure and extreme measures to ensure your safe passage to your destination. Now, this notion of fugitivity is also the impetus behind our police force. Say that one more time. This notion of fugitivity is the impetus or the origin of our modern day police force. What do I mean when I say that? What do I mean when I say that? Think about it. Someone runs away from the plantation. They're stolen property. They send someone to go get them and bring them back to the plantation. Someone commits a crime. The police comes and goes take them to where? Where did the police take? The jail. Right? So do you know the only place in our society where enslavement is legal? Where's that place? In the jail. So now do you understand when I say that the notion of fugitivity is the rationale, is the impetus behind our modern day police system? The reason that they developed police was to bring runaway enslaved people back into the plantation. So it's not irrational or illogical for me to understand why prison is the only place where enslavement is legal. So what you must understand is they haven't eliminated the plantation, they just reframed the plantation. So this is our first concept, fugitivity, the act of stealing oneself, of remaining in constant flight from capture, fugitivity. Now, the second theoretical frame I want to work through is this notion of intersectionality. Has anyone heard of the term intersectionality? No, okay. So intersectionality is deeply tied to the notion of positionality, or sorry, positionality, excuse me. So part of my positionality, right? I'm a Black man, right? I'm male, I'm Black, right? I'm heterosexual, right? This is part of my positionality. If there's a thing as a middle class, I would occupy the middle class, right? So what your positionality is the things that make you understand who you are, right? So this notion of intersectionality is tied to positionality because intersectionality is about how these positions that you occupy intersect with forms of oppression, right? So for myself, as a man, I'm on the dominant side of oppression because we operate in a patriarchal society. But as a Black man, I'm operating on the lower end of the society because we operate within a anti-Black and racist society. So you see how your positionality informs your intersection. So for Harriet Tubman, not only was she fighting anti-Black sentiments in the form of the plantation society, right? But a large part of her work was trying to inform the women's suffrage movement about the importance of Black women suffering. So her intersection came from her oppression not only as a Black individual or an African descendant individual, but also as her positionality as a woman, right? So this is why this notion of intersectionality becomes important, because truth be told, one of the more foremost thinkers or activists as it pertains to these notions of intersectionality is Harriet Tubman. All right. It says, as was mentioned, right, she's often described as an illiterate woman who can neither read or write. However, her ability to read the world, from curing sickness with her knowledge of herbal medicines, to navigating natural terrain via the night sky, through her knowledge of astronomy, remained key in escaping and rescuing others from enslavement. So for me, when I heard this, right, it made me think back to week one. And I told you things like the Dogon who were able to see Sirius Star A and Sirius Star B with the naked eye. When we watched the video about how the ancient Kemetics were able to build the pyramids in direct alignment with the star systems, right? So for me, that's not too beyond reason, because I know as African people, we always had the ability to use the stars to navigate, right? And what this also does, it forces us to expand our definition of literacy, right? So she may not have been able to pick up a piece of paper and read the words on the paper. And let's be honest and be clear as to why she could not do that, right? She comes up in a time where it was illegal for her to be caught with a piece of paper in hand. You would literally have your arm cut off for being caught with books. There's a book called School Clothes written by Jarvis Gibbons, who talks about an elder by the name of Papa Dallas, who got caught twice reading. And what his overseer, what his plantation owner did was pour acid in his eye to ensure that he will never read again. But furthermore, to ensure that when everyone else on the plantation seen Papa Dallas, they knew not to read either. So when you say, oh, she's illiterate in this normative capacity, right? We must understand as to why. But at the same time, her ability to read life, right? To read the plants must also allow us to expand our definition of literacy. What else? It talks about how her roads reach far beyond her most famous one as the conductor of the Underground Railroad. 13 trips to the South and rescued approximately 70 enslaved from the plantation system, according to the most recent biographies. Also a Civil War veteran, nurse, community organizer, women's suffrage, and border crossing migrant. So this idea of being a border crossing migrant, and in our current time, this conversation is picking up a lot of steam as it pertains to our presidential election, right? How does Biden choose to police the borders? How will Trump choose to police the borders, right? But what the article is pointing us to is the fact that Tubman herself was one to be able to cross the borders. I think what they call them coyotes now, that will take people from one part of the right. So Harriet Tubman was a grandized coyote, because not only was she taking people to freedom, right? She took them from the United States to Canada, right? So this is why they're talking about her in the capacity of someone who traversed borders, right? So not only was her activism done within the confines of the United States, part of that activism was placing people outside of the United States, preferably into Canada, right? Um, on page 4, it says that, of course, Tubman herself contributed to this larger-than-life portrait. After attending the NACW convention, Tubman later went on to a women's suffrage meeting in Rochester, New York, on November of 1896, led on stage by Susan B. Anthony. The elderly Tubman declared to another appreciative audience how I was the conductor on the Underground Railroad for 8 years. And I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off track, and I never lost a passenger. So 8 years, right? 13 trips back and forth. And I believe it says over 70 people. And she never lost one person. Like sit on that, right? Like this is not just on some like, yo, we're just traveling on a tour across the north into Canada. Nah, like this is under the most duress circumstances. The most duress circumstances. 13 times, over 13 times, over 70 people in an 8-year time span and haven't lost one. In fact, she said if she would have been at the capacity to rescue more if they knew they were enslaved. Think about that. I probably could have pulled off more than 70 or 77 or whatever the number is if they recognized that they were enslaved. So what she's saying is they opted to stay on the plantation. Like, yo, the train is leaving now. I'm cool. I'm going to stay right here and continue my work. This is what she's saying, right? In crafting a narrative emphasizing her role as an Underground Railroad conductor, Tubman validated the struggle for women's rights. Moreover, Tubman's story reminded women that if she, a woman, could transgress the race and gender limitations that forbade women from navigating the world and freely crossing the borders between North and South, Canada and the United States, and to do so without a man's help, if she, a woman, could lead a successful battle during the Civil War, then surely women deserve the right to vote and the right to full citizenship. Such a complex history seamlessly weaves women's rights and the rights of African Americans. So this is a really bold claim, right? Because she's doing these things in a time that women aren't able to freely travel. So not only is you Black and you doing that, which looks weird within itself, right, in this time, but it's weird for a woman to be traveling without a man. But again, over 8 years, over 13 trips, and haven't lost one person. This is profoundly impossible that she's able to pull off. But what she's saying is, not only was I able to do this, this is an example as to why we should allow women to vote. If I can pull this off without all the restrictions placed on me, if I can pull this off with all the restrictions placed on me, what do women have the capacity to do once you remove those constrictions? And she's using her life as an example, right? Like, yo, I led a battalion in the Civil War. You trying to tell me women can't vote? I fought for this motherfucker. What you saying? Significantly, Guy Sheffield notes that Tubman's life, as well as the lives of other historical women, needs to be felt more concretely in the present. As she suggests, I think we need to talk about their political activism, and we need to talk about their courageousness and struggle. We also need to talk about their everyday lives and choices they've made. And I think this is another why this becomes important, right? One thing that men cannot do that women have the capacity to do is give life. Because they have that capacity, they are situated as the motherly role, right? And I don't know in great detail what her Harriet Tubman's role was as a mother, or I don't know that backstory. But what I do know is for all women who engaged in forms of activism, they typically had to play this dual role of mother and activist, right? And I think what the claim is being made is being taken into account their daily lives. That is important. Because once you look at the daily lives of most women activists, you see that this role and this capacity of mother is not removed. I think about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense and the idea of creating a free breakfast program, okay? The recognition that it's hard for these kids to go to school and learn if they're hungry. So let's feed them, right? I bring this up to say this is something that the women of the Black Panther Party came up with. Wouldn't it make sense? Because who do you think is feeding the kids? The woman, right? And I don't say this from a patriarchal standpoint, but in the sense of they're the mother, right? They're the ones who are nurturing and caring for the child, right? So they're going to be the first ones to think about that kid's welfare and that kid being able to eat. So what she's pointing out is not only do we talk about these big grandiose things that women do that are historical, but we must also pay attention to the little things, to what's called the quotidian, every day, right? That becomes vastly important as well. What else? I'm not really too interested into the whole like scandal around the YouTube shit. Like that's least interesting to me. I think her life within itself is really fascinating. Um, what we'll do is we'll transition into Fishbowl, and then we'll just open it up for further conversation after Fishbowl. Again, you have to go twice per semester. You have one time to pass. You could talk about your journals. You could talk about what was discussed in your breakout groups, or you could talk about anything discussed in the lecture. Does anyone want to volunteer? Anthony? Anyone else? And then
Donald,
Donald, got you, Donald. And we'll use one more, preferably a woman if possible, just to kind of provide some balance. Okay, Tatiana, thank you. Anthony, we'll start with you.
So basically, I just wanted to talk about how just reading obviously the passage definitely was very mind-opening. I remember in the beginning of like the semester you mentioned that there are a lot of things that we never knew about certain historical figures that, obviously they never taught us. And this, idea that Harriet Tubman did more than obviously the Underground Railroad is such a fascinating thing. But to me personally, what I found impactful was the fact that she had, I don't know if they're called like setbacks, but the idea that she was called illiterate, and I believe she had an injury during her like adolescence, and the fact that she could do all these things more than just, helping these enslaved people, but I think herbal medicine was talked about. So it kind of goes to show that intelligence that she had, despite, being kind of looked down upon, already being, black, and then adding on to the fact that she's a woman, kind of just proves the idea that, that this idea that people can be inferior is such like it's just hateful and there's no reason to it, And I feel like she's a great example to how she overcame so many things, and yet people kind of still try to find a way to, I guess, prey on her downfall.
Thank you, Anthony. Well said. Donald?
yeah, just two things touched me in this reading and your conversation about one, Harriet Tubman was a I believe was one of the greatest women in the United States because of what she done, freeing enslaved people. The word enslaved, to my understanding, is basically against their will, where they was changed and treated as ownership. And what the writer didn't basically say about, and I think that word came later, the word chattel slavery, where the word chattel mean ownerships of a cup, a car, or, and they made it person. So there was always slaves in the other side of the world. However, they was never owned. They paid off their debt and worked it out. And these was all human beings, regardless of the outside color of their skin and where they was from. But here specifically, and I believe only the place in the world of America was the people that came from Europe made these people their property as if it was a car, a cup, or something like that. And like you said, is the when they decided to fight for their freedom or wanted to be free through the spirits, their spirits, the African spirit, which they came from, these owners of them created a posse or whatever, of dogs and men to go after them, and what originated as the police of the United States. And so prior to that, there was no police. This was the origin and beginning of police in America. If somebody did a crime, whatever, prior to that running of going out to slavery, it was not treated as such. There was no police. There was no, hey, you out of bound or you stole something, whatever. It was more like take care of your own self. But police then and police now, fast forward, the incarceration and the 14th Amendment is part of the government establishment of continuation of the police, like you said, where they lock up more minorities and blacks than ever before across this country. That's my point.
Thank you, Donald. More minoritized people or marginalized people, right? Tatiana?
I was kind of going to talk about a little bit of what each of them talked about. So, like, with what Anthony said, how, like, at the time, not only, like, with her being Black and everything, like, but the fact that even, like, being a woman at the time, they were very, like, downplayed. Like, they just stay at home, cook, clean, have kids, like, but, like, she really, like, even with taking race out of it, she really, like, pushed those boundaries and, like you said, like she was able to do all those trips and never lost anybody. And then so like it kind of just like proves all those stereotypes wrong. And so like even though she was quote unquote illiterate, she still did all those things that these other people couldn't do. And then like how you were saying with how like jail is kind of like the legalized like what's it called, enslavement. Like it's true because when you think about it, like when you're in jail you do all this labor for free. Some people work in the kitchen, they do laundry, like so on and so forth, and they have to like get thrown in like what is it called, like solitary, whatever it's called. So like if you like misbehave, so like it's, and especially with racism now, like when like you get locked up for no reason, like then they're basically like locking you up because of your race. So it's legal, but it's technically like it's still enslavement because they didn't do anything, so they get wrongfully put into jail and now they have to do all this free labor while they're in there. So it's just funny how like they just made it normal and they just put a different name on it and just like want to call it cool. But yeah.
You know, and to your point, Tatiana, not to fuck y'all up, but like just call it what it is, right? Victoria's Secret. Do you know that they have prisoners making the draws for Victoria's Secret because it's a cheap labor source? Boeing airplanes. A lot of the seats in the interiors of these planes are made by people who are in prison. If you want to think back a couple of years ago when you had like the fires going through Northern California, they released the inmates to go fight the fires, right? But check it though. If you were to be free, right? If you were to able to like catch parole or what have you, you could even use that as an experience to go get a firefighter job because you can't be a firefighter because you a felon. But they'll have your ass out there fighting that fire and risking your life though. Did you know that prisons are privatized? So what does it mean when I say that prisons are privatized? Somebody explain that for us. What do you think it means when I say prisons are privatized? Go ahead, Jim.
I think, aren't they run by like certain people? Like they're run by certain, it's not like a government type of thing. It's ran by almost like a business if someone owns it.
That's it. It's owned by corporations. Corporation, yes, Taylor, corporations own prisons. So think about this. If a corporation owns a prison, then that means they're in the business of locking people up. Which means what? They get paid for everybody who is in a cell. And 3/4 of the prison population are African descended people. But we have gone so far beyond the state of enslavement that we're the land of the free. Nowhere else in the world does prison like the United States. Let's not count the people who are on parole and probation and state monitoring. Shit, we need a Mama Moses for those locked in prison. I do want to speak to just how dope of a person Harriet Tubman was. Give me 1 second. Like, just to even like look at her, you could tell she is nothing to be fucked with. Like, one second, let me move this shit. Is this not like the most gangster pose in the world? Like, what? She got her hands crossed, like, fuck with me if you want to, right? Like, look at her. I mean, incredible woman. And she says she carried a shotgun not for those catchers and the enslavers, but for the ones who would snitch on her. Like think about that. The shotgun was not for the enslaver. It was for the enslaved that would snitch on her. Going back to this notion or this idea that I could have freed more people if they knew that they were enslaved. Profoundly brilliant. To be like what level of courage and not allowing fear to overcome you to do what you're placed on the planet to do. I mean, I think that's really profound and fascinating. Talk back to me. What are your thoughts? What are your comments? What are your questions? What are your concerns? Muhammad, what are you thinking?
I'm still thinking about the stuff you talked about with the prison thing is like a cooperation here. It got me like to understand the whole point of prison and why here in America you guys have like all these prison when and most of the people inside are like the percentage of black people and is way too much inside the prisons. And when you say people are getting paid for prisoners, or I didn't understand it like 100%, but it doesn't show like this country is working towards something good, since most of the people are locked up in prison for other people to make money off them.
Where are you from, Mohammed?
I'm from Middle East,
Where, like, where in the Middle East, Mohammed?
Saudi Arabia.
Okay. And just for clarity, it's not you guys. That ain't me. I ain't part of that shit, right? Like, I'm a victim of this shit, though. Let's clear that out the way off jump, right? Like, but I hear you. I understand what you're saying. Um, yes, and that's why I say the United States is very unique in the way that they lock people up, right?
Yeah, it is. It is so different from any other place.
Absolutely. What I would say are like cousins in the way that they perform the carcerality or prison, right? Israel, very much similar in the way that they treat people in terms of who can be disposable in these type of prisons and things of that nature. In fact, you'll be surprised how the ties between Israeli military forces and United States police forces lock and key. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand what you say, to be honest.
Yeah. And if you want deeper insight, if you have Netflix, I think it's still up. It's a documentary called 14th, which talks about the 14th Amendment. And it goes into great detail about how these prisons become privatized and how it impacts, in particularly the Black community. If you have some time, that'll be a great source of further insight for you.
Hopefully, I still have time to look at it.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, what you thinking?
Uh, it's just like very surprising that, you know, about her, mainly because I really haven't, this is my first year of college and high school. They really talked about that. And so with that said, everything that this like I'm sorry that that she's like very smart actually. She's very intelligent. Besides, even though she couldn't read or write, she had different method and her goal in life. When she was her situation she wanted, obviously it was negative towards her, so she wanted to help her and help other people. So I think that is like, very brave of her at that time.
And you know what, Brian? You touched on something that I didn't even bring up today, right? Not only did she free herself, right? Like she did the work necessary to get free, but then she was like, "This ain't enough. I'm gonna go back and make sure that my family's good," right? And it's like, that ain't enough because I still know people who are on this plantation enslaved. So I'm gonna go back and get them. And it started from that standpoint just to become what she was placed on this place to do. It became her purpose, right? But it's allowing herself not to solely be focused on herself, to allow herself to open up to the needs of the collective that allowed her to be on the path of her purpose. Mark, what you thinking?
So you mentioned earlier about privatized like companies as well, like what Mohammed was talking about, and I didn't know about that initially. So I found that interesting that even though we've gone through lengths of trying to fight for kind of freedom, like these days there's like still different forms of, even though it's not as obvious, there's still different forms of like racism and like segregation basically. And like what you were talking about, like Victoria's Secret and how they're like kind of like they're still like enslaved. And people like find different ways to benefit them, just like in our history books, they create like narratives. So like to benefit their political or like social economic like goals in our country.
Yeah, very much
Yeah,
so.
very much so.
In y'all
In
country.
y'all country.
Um, but
Like
are y'all surprised though about like the whole prison thing? Like, is that beyond reason? If you think about like what this country values and how this country operates and the history of the country, is that really that surprising? Like really though, like when you really, really think about it.
It is surprising. This country has crazy potential from the technology, from anything, but it's for me, it's still considered outdated in how they run their prisons.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe I'm a little jaded, Muhammad, because I was born in this motherfucker, right? Like, and I see it in, like, you know, so maybe my view is a little jaded in that sense. You know, maybe when it comes to things in that regard, I'm a little, the glass is half empty type. You know, so I'll give that. But just, you know, a country that's built on, as Don pointed out, right, making people property for the benefit of someone else. That's the foundation of what this is, right? Like, this is the origins of what this country is, right? Like, if you have a job, okay, and someone goes to work for you and you still collect the check, right? Like, this is the origins of what this country is. So for me, I'm not surprised to hear that they'll find another way to maintain that source of cheap or free labor, right? Again, if you understand capitalism, if you truly understand capitalism, it shouldn't be surprising. Think of it this way. Why do we have sweatshops? What's the purpose of a sweatshop? Real question. Why? Somebody tell me.
Make like cheap clothing so the bigger companies can make more money off of like cheap labor.
Cheap labor. Thank you, Anthony. The purpose of a sweatshop is cheap labor. I could pay somebody in a sweatshop that I would not pay, that a wage that no one else will accept, right? That's the purpose of a sweatshop. It's a foundational aspect of this system of capitalism. You maximize your income and minimize your output. So ever since the plantation system ended, they've just been finding other ways to maximize income, minimize profit. So to me, it's not surprising. They just found a super efficient way of doing it, and they put it under the guise or the smokescreen of law and order. Because if we don't have prisons, if we don't have policing, crime would go rampant. What if I told you we don't need police? What if I told you we don't need police? You think about that. We don't need fucking police. Not a rhetorical question. I'm serious. What do you think about the idea of not having police?
I think it will be a disaster.
You think it'll be a disaster? So
Yeah,
what?
I lived in downtown LA, and it has professors, it has rich people, it has everything, but it's basically corrupted to the max.
So Muhammad, let me tell you this. Let me tell you the truth. Police do not stop crime. 98% of the time, the police arrive on the scene after the crime happens. The other 2% is an accident. This is statistical facts. Police do not stop crime. Think about it. Somebody gets robbed, then what do? Call the police. The robbery already happened. So again, we don't need police. Also, the majority of the work that police do has nothing to do with violence. Nothing to do with violence. It's very minimal that when police get called to the scene, it has to do with a violent act. If you don't believe me, look it up.
Yeah, but for us civilian, if we get involved in helping other people getting robbed, then the police will blame us for helping. So how do we stop it?
Muhammad, that happens anyway. That already
Yeah,
happened.
you're right. That's right.
I'm gonna tell you a story. About 6 years ago, there was a shootout that took place in a Trader Joe's, okay? This is in California. The police arrived to the scene on the Trader Joe's, shoot into the Trader Joe's to kill the man with the gun, right? Kill civilians, and they placed the murder of the civilians on the man who had the gun in Trader Joe's. You see what I'm saying? Have you know about the system that police do of planning things on people? So what I'm saying is, like if we think about it, they cause more harm than they do good. I'm not talking hyperbole. I'm talking like statistical data, right? Like statistically, arrive to the scene after it happens. When they get called to the scene, 9 times out of, we'll say 7 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with violence, right? How many rebellions or what you may call riots have you seen to where they have been peaceful until who arrives? Tell me I'm lying. So I think
No, you're not.
so and I'm not talking just to you, Muhammad. I'm talking to us all, but I think what happens is we lose faith in our human capacity. Why can't we have social workers that come to the scene when we're having people having mental breakdowns? Because what does happen, we call police to the scenes and the police end up shooting these individuals. Very common occurrence. So why don't you have someone trained to deal with someone who is having a mental breakdown in a way that does not end with them dead? So again, I ask you, what if we don't need police? What if police their sole purpose is to feed what's called the prison industrial complex? So if a company has a product, you need what? Salesmen. Police are the salesmen. They're selling prison time. Y'all heard of stop and frisk? No? It's recently outlawed in New York. But what stop and frisk was, if you're walking in New York, a police could just stop you and pat you down. And if they find something on you, your ass going to jail. Who do you think got stopped? Who do you think got stopped? No one? No thoughts?
Black males.
Yeah,
People.
black folk.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
In the state of California, the Black population, including female,
Yep.
women, grown men, and children, is only 6% of 100%. So therefore, that means if you divide that into 3, it's 2% men, 2% women, 2% children. However, in the prison population in county jails, at 2% males, men, the population in these places are 39, 40%. And yet they're only 2% of the population in the state. So the police knows, and this is not new, if they incarcerate the male, they hold down the population growth of the blacks as well. The black population from rising above 6%. And so if you incarcerate the gentiles, the male, there can be no reproduction of the blacks. So this is something that has taken place. It's kind of like genocide, but it's modern day. And people don't just think, they don't think about that. They just say, oh, well, that guy's got it coming. But, this is something that's moved forward to nowadays. If you guys wasn't students, especially black students, going to school, getting educated, you're subject to going into incarceration.
Anyone familiar with the preschool to prison pipeline? I've never heard of that either. I'm fucking y'all up today. I'm like, God damn, bro, this is dismal. But this is the truth of where y'all live. They track you based on how successful you are in school as early as preschool to prepare a jail cell for you. Again, if you don't believe me, look it up. Preschool to prison pipeline. So all that tracking that they do on kids as early as preschool, that's the purpose of that tracking. And if they determine that you're unable to navigate the schooling system, then they'll prepare a cell for you. Look it up. Just to make sure I ain't bullshitting up here making stuff up. Look it up. Taylor, what you thinking?
About everything about the police or like the reading but for?
Either or.
Okay, well, about the reading, I was gonna say that um I thought it was like really interesting that like through like everything she was still able to gain so much education and like to become like a nurse and to like learn all of that about medicine because those aren't like easy topics to like learn about and like that kind of knowledge is like really special knowledge like it takes a lot to learn about that and like it was cool that she was able to like do all of that while everything was going on in her life.
Yeah, good call out.